All right, good morning again, and good afternoon, and for some, good evening for those of you not in the United States. My name is David Merrill. I'm the CTO of CorbinSoft, and today, in conjunction with Irena Sondin, a colleague of CorbinSoft's with Siemens, we will be presenting how to bypass Excel as used for steps towards IMDRF compliance. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll try to keep our presentation to a very short 30 minutes. The agenda is fairly simple. We'll start off with some highlighted information from Siemens about accelerating your digital future, and Irena will take that lead. And then I'll follow through with 3 basic scenarios. One, how to really bypass Excel when you're using the IMDRF guides, and then also bringing in a common library for centralized control and reuse of those annexes. And then finally, how to bypass Excel entirely for risk management analysis and final reporting. And we'll wrap up with a few questions and answers. If you do have any difficulty in the webinar, I would suggest that you email the panelists. We have those on staff from both CorbinSoft and Siemens ready to answer your questions. And also I would encourage you to use the Q&A option in GoToWebinar to be able to ask any questions about the products and what you see. Additionally, don't even feel like you need to wait until the end of the webinar. You can send an email to me, David Merrill, at corbinsoft.com at any time. With that, I'd like to introduce Irena Sondin.
Thank you, David, and thank you everyone in our audience today. The solution that you're going to see today in this webinar is a Siemens solution. Siemens is a global technology company, and what we do is we bring together both the digital and the physical worlds to help our customers achieve their digital transformation goals. I am part of Siemens' digital industry software business, focusing on medical devices. So I just want to start by talking a little bit about medical devices in this very competitive world. Our customers really run into keeping product innovation high on their radar, quality, and maintaining adherence to ever-changing global regulations, as well as FDA compliance. All of this is very crucial for our customers. And through the Siemens Accelerator portfolio, which is an integrated portfolio of software, of applications, and of services, and through a digital thread approach, our solutions are enabling our customers to meet their goals of becoming a digital enterprise and that kind of transformation that goes along with that. So just high level, the digital thread links together all the activities across the product lifecycle, and it addresses the complex business problems our customers face each and every day, from design control all the way to post-market surveillance, which is the final thread in creating that closed-loop feedback system so our customers can proactively respond to any quality issues, any complaints, and get to those issues early on. So in short, the Siemens Accelerator portfolio empowers our customers to design, to realize, and to optimize their medical device development and manufacturing processes by harnessing ever-growing complexity. It can be personalized and adapted to fit your specific goals, regardless of the size of your organization, so you can achieve your goals of becoming a digital enterprise. If you would like to learn more about Siemens and our portfolio accelerator, my contact information will be presented at the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irena. I really do think it's important to understand the full context of how Polarion as a solution fits within this very important continuum called the digital thread throughout. It's something that as CorbinSoft, we focus primarily on the needs of a Polarian solution within the design control and early product development ideation, and less so on the manufacturing side, where all of the other key Siemens solutions come into play. And really that comes back to why the information about the IMDRF is important. And I'm certainly no expert in this organization as a whole, but I found two parts of their strategic plan to be very relevant to the kind of work that we at CorbinSoft do with our customers. And the first one is really here in this paragraph, that they understand that the regulatory challenges are always changing, and we have to be able to manage and adapt the changes to maintain this vigilance of regulatory compliance, along with the notion of being able to change, adapt, and bring important products to market. One quote that I found particularly interesting in this document, that I've seen in my history of working with risk management in general, is the idea of delayed treatment. So in some ways, delayed treatment represents the least amount of risk to a patient when you're analyzing risk management. But the IMDRF really brings out the idea that treatment delayed could be treatment denied. And especially for those organizations bringing COVID solutions to market, we want to make sure that we can move quickly through the process, both within a company producing the medical device and certainly being able to move through the regulatory process, still maintaining due diligence, but maintaining due diligence faster with increasing frequency of change. And this is an important part of the IMDRF, which now brings us to why we're here today. The IMDRF has released some Annex Codes, and these Annex Codes can become important now. We have more and more customers looking to leverage this formal classification to speed not just the thought process of product design and risk management within their own company, but also through the various regulatory bodies that need to review and audit the process of design control. And the IMDRF as a global organization is attempting to converge all of these terminology into a concise format that can be used often. One of the things that we'll see right away is that these Annex Codes are available in both Excel and a format called JSON. So when I said bypass Excel in using these regulation codes, I might actually have to reverse that for my first comment, because if I looked at, for example, what is used to produce this information, what's coming out of the IMDRF, it is in fact an Excel file. And the Excel file is defining level terms that can be used. In this case, we're looking at Annex F, which might be considered adverse health effects. And we see these terms being defined in a spreadsheet. And what we want to do is take it away from that spreadsheet and use the transfer formats of Excel and JSON to go directly into a structured tool. Well, let's now talk about a small practical demonstration that we'll focus on. Our webinar today will be broken up in terms of very small concepts and some practical demonstrations of how that happens. First off, let me tell you a little bit about Polarion. Siemens Polarion is an ALM solution for product development, and it addresses, I call them design control challenges, solving problems to the challenges that you have and allowing you to move forward with standard operating procedures that are already in place. There's three attributes of Polarion that I think really come to bat here in addressing not just this problem of maintaining Annex Codes and regulatory requirements, but in general. And it differentiates itself from other solution tools. One is a very strong control of what I will call structured documents as a data object. It allows us to have common data, and then it brings both very strong workflow and complete end-to-end traceability. So what we'll see today is how I moved from the spreadsheet from the IMDRF into Polarion data objects. Now to do that, I'm going to bring in a view of Polarion. I think you might have seen that flash earlier as I was trying to figure out exactly which screen I would be sharing today. And what you can see here is a particular project that's a common product library project. Inside here, I would see my regulatory standards that are common. I would see SOPs, common templates, but most especially for our case, we're seeing the IMDRF annex information. And it can be as simply organized as a document that you see now, but inside this document is structured into individual items. So just as you would sort of review a normal Word document, or even that Excel document that you saw earlier, this then becomes a much more structured configuration of the IMDRF terms and conditions. So we see here built into Polarian data structures the same information that is coming from the IMDRF. It allows me to review and approve and assign applicability for my particular medical device. It allows me to be able to augment that into what I might consider more of a regulatory norm for my own company, either expanding the definitions above the IMDRF or augmenting some of the information. This is a Polarian work item controlling, in this case, Annex A. If we moved ahead and looked at Annex F, which we'll see in a little while, we can see this is also a document. I can also view specific work items. But one of the things that we'll see immediately in here is that we're adding to the definition of the adverse health effect a harm severity code, and we'll use that a little bit later on. This stops being something that has to happen with every single risk assessment and becomes a controllable set of data that we'll reference later on. And so when I use Polarian, I'm using a single server. This server in my case is located in the Amazon cloud, and it could be located in any particular location or environment of yours. Well, let's go back and move on to the next concept here, which is if we bypassed Excel to be able to get this information into Polarian as common information, how do we bypass Excel for using this information? And I would say from my perspective, Excel is often used really inappropriately as a database. It is a very powerful tool, but the more Excel documents that I have, the more versions of Excel documents, the more I ask a document to do, the more challenging it becomes within the tool to maintain a consistent process. It fails what I would consider the single source of truth doctrine, and we have to review it and give special attention to any human error that could ultimately, and this human error is really data processing error, so I'll differentiate that from the kind of assessment and content that might be going on. It really is the small things of maintaining the right spreadsheet with the right references and the right formulas and macros to accommodate the very challenging risk process that you're faced with. So if it's worth doing in Polarian. So let's see now how Polarian, using the Annex Codes, can organize this information in a consistent format. So first off, I'm going to come back to the idea of Excel. We're going to take this one away. We're not going to pay too much attention anymore to that Annex Code. And I'm going to bring in what for me is a very real world example of a DFMEA spreadsheet. This was adapted from something that we saw directly from a customer. And you can see that this customer is already identifying Annex Codes that are part of their DFMEA assessment. I've grayed out any of the real information, but you can see as I move across here, they are assessing all of the probability of occurrence, the harm, and then manually putting in mitigation information that they would track without using a tool like Polarian. Down below also, you can see these extra worksheets have to include that referential information because Excel does not easily access the common data library that we might be talking about in Polarian. So I'll set this aside, and I'm sure if you were to bring up your risk or FMEA spreadsheet, we might see something a little bit different, but very similar in nature. And so the pressure to incorporate these varying Annex Codes becomes very real in our scenario. Well, how do we solve this particular problem in Polarian? Let me open back up what was our common library, and I'm going to shift and look more closely at specific items that represent a risk analysis, and specifically a system risk hazard. So as I go through this particular format here, you can see that each risk has a particular topic. I now assess harm not so much intuitively as the risk analyst, but from a common list, that common list of AHOs coming from Annex F, where we have very detailed adverse health effects, and we have also specifically associated harm to those. So if I were to go for, if I type delay to diagnosis, delay to treatment, let me borrow that a little bit, and then that becomes a modified risk or potential harm outcome from the hazardous situation of this risk. And then down below here, you can see that I can put in sequence of events, clinical effect information, and now I can start perhaps bringing into bear some of the other content from the annexes. And so you can see here that I've listed references to Annex B and Annex C in similar fashion, where instead of having to maintain this in spreadsheet lookup database, I really am looking up this content from applicable items of both Annex B, C, and it doesn't have to stop there. We just happen to have referenced B, C, and F in this particular structure. And as I move down through here and save this item, the calculations are changing, and I have a very different scoring for what becomes the minor risk severity of delay to treatment. And now I can plan the future work for mitigation and the type of verification of that mitigation that I might see. So you can see that this risk happens to identify the risk of a user need. I might begin the process of risk mitigation by finding a system requirement or product requirement that mitigates that risk. And if I move down and look at another one, you can see that I have a more detailed association here, where this particular risk is assessing the risk of a user need, it's responding to a customer complaint, and it's being mitigated by requirements and further elaborated from moving from the risk item to an FMEA work item. So we're bringing the idea of that spreadsheet off the chart, but still being able to look at spreadsheet-like capability directly here from the Polarian console. And I can give a nod certainly to Microsoft Excel and export the spreadsheet in a very similar format that we might have seen earlier. But what happens is we live and breathe these particular work items side by side with the system engineering requirements, side by side with the verification and validation. Okay, so we've seen that we want to move from that reliance of an Excel worksheet as an embodiment of the FMEA data. We want to make all of that information dynamic and accessible inside Polarion. I don't have to check out a whole document. I don't have multiple copies of the document. I have live information. But that goes most of the way, but we still have some additional challenges. That final deliverable. One of the things that I hear from our customers often is to get to that final deliverable, even inside of Excel, there's a lot of copying and pasting. There's a lot of duplication of data. And as that data gets replicated, the possibility for additional human error increases. And they have to reproduce the same kind of traceability reports they might be looking at for system engineering to verification and validation in their design control process. So what are we trying to do to solve this challenge? What we really want is full traceability in this role of a risk assessment, viewing the mitigations, and then ultimately the verification of those mitigations. We want to be able to score the pre-mitigation indices and see them just like you normally would inside of Excel, and ultimately be able to release this dynamic content from a tool like Polarion. In this case, that's what we'll see, but in the same process that you would with typical documents. So I might expect to see electronic signature and controlled outputs from Polarion as deliverables that have the full force and weight that they would go through if you were mimicking a manual process with Word documents in Excel and copying tables from Excel into Word, and then finally releasing that Word document. We want to simplify all that data, that data management, so that the work product that's released has a much higher degree of compliance to the goals that the IMDRF, certainly also the FDA and your own internal quality processes are targeting. So what will we see in this part of the practical demonstration? We're going to view and go through a potential release process of a system harm and hazard analysis document. We'll see the difference between the dynamic content and the human discernible information and description of that particular risk process for that particular revision of the document. We will abandon the need and the reliance for copying and pasting and really make this risk document a summation of all the underlying work that's going on, all of the system engineering, all of the risk assessments, all of the V&V activities will be embodied in what we're about to see. And we want to take the same tools and techniques, the same standard use practices, and simply extend that umbrella to risk management so stakeholders can just as effectively manage the release of system engineering documents like requirements, just as easily distribute protocols for V&V activities as they would for the risk. So I'm going to bring back Polarion again. And this time, instead of looking at this work item view, I have a correlated risk management file view that is, its goal is to identify and present an electronic DHF or design history file organization to the content. So you can see that I can have working documents under development, and I can also see and appreciate that I have approved documents that have been released. And as you can see here for this FMEA report document, I am in the working document, I am in draft at revision C. Meanwhile, I can always look at the released revision B right in the same tool. I don't have to go to another tool to see what that would look like. And it's been formally released with electronic signatures. Well, let's go look at this SHA document that is going to be a culmination of all of the data that we've presented from the work items themselves. As I move down through this document, this is now a more structured Polarian document where sometimes I would have text that comes from my document template for a risk summary. And then in blue text, it might be an indication that the user should come in as you would in Word and maintain the purpose. And I won't go into too much more detail about this particular document, but we can reference all of the other shared content. We can dynamically populate abbreviations and glossary terms. But ultimately, as we move down through this document, we want to see the incorporation of dynamic tables here. So no one's had to copy and paste this table in. It's being dynamically generated from the content to show the distribution of the risk index before and after mitigation. And as I move down through here, you can see now also that instead of seeing the same information that we're talking about in Microsoft Excel, we're seeing this dynamic content being displayed in a table within the document. So as I go across, I have a risk work item, a SHA risk work item with title and assessments of hazardous situation, of harm, and pre-mitigation assessment. And then we see all of the risk mitigation associated to that, all of the requirements and items, which if implemented will cause a reduction of the risk priority level in this case. So how can I easily justify the reduction of risk from 3 to 2? Well, it's done by these requirements, and these requirements are verified in a particular protocol. And we can show the association of that traceability either at the protocol document level or directly to the test itself. I know this is kind of a fast look into a very complex process, but what we want to be able to do once we've accumulated this information is be able to move it from draft to ability to collaborate and include individual users in this document. So I can make sure that the right user is included here, and we'll put them into, I won't go through all, we don't have time to sort of complete the entire list of who the reviewers and approvers of this particular document might be. I'll go ahead and just save that, and then this would be the submission of that for general review and collaboration, and then ultimately to be able to submit that for final approval. And as a final look before we turn over to conclude the webinar and address any questions, maybe it would be appropriate to look at what an approved FMEA document looks like. It has a very similar look and feel, but now what I'm doing is I'm viewing this document inside the immutable history of Polarion, and we're seeing who, in this case, just for purposes of demonstration, just one person has signed this particular document. There's nothing I can do to alter this document, and no future change to the FMEA data would cause any change to this document. And this might be something that ultimately gets released into some other document management system that you might already be using. Well, what are some possible next actions for today? I'll stop in just a moment and address questions that might have come in. We'll perform a soft close. But I wanted to point out that you can contact CorbinSoft directly. You can ask us questions that are about implementing relevant regulatory standards beyond the IMDRF Annex Codes for sure. We can talk to you a little bit about effective ways to reach out and pull the JSON information into Polarion directly. You can certainly evaluate Polarion for your own product development needs, even if you have some elements well tendered in other applications. Polarion has a very tactical entry so that if there are needs just of risk management that are unmet, you can implement Polarion just for risk management and connect out to other elements of the system engineering and V&V structured process that you might have. And if you're interested in eliminating Excel and copying and pasting, that's another really good reason to contact CorbinSoft. And certainly you can also contact Arena at Siemens. You can think of us as being part of the same team in this regard, except that Arena will be able to open the doors to the rest of the full digital thread. Thank you very much for attending. I'll leave this contact information slide up and address it and view if there's any chat information or questions that have been asked. Okay, Victor has a question. Can we customize reports to our company's standards? And that's an often asked question, and important not just for reports, but for the entire framework and structure of Polarion as a whole. Even what you've seen today is just a representation of what Polarion can do to match your own quality standards, your own risk SOPs, or really any aspect of your product development and design control process. Polarion is exceptionally good at being able to model your process and present that information in the forms, the documents, and the items associated to your development challenges. So the answer is that absolutely yes. That risk document that we saw is just one method. One of the things that would often happen during an implementation is to take a close examination of your current risk spreadsheets and start off from the point of these known templates in Polarion that have adapted to that, but make changes to get ready to use the Annex Codes if you're not using them today, or take advantage of the Annex Code usage right away by developing the common library as we saw earlier. Good question, Victor. All right, well, that takes us to the promised end of our webinar today. We will create a recording for this webinar and post it both on the CorbinSoft site and a publicly available site on YouTube. Thank you very much for your attendance today, and I really look forward to hear from you later on. Thank you very much.